Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he investigates a theft that makes no sense. A brass compass stolen from a locked study, yet worth almost nothing at all. But this was no ordinary compass. Its needle pointed to something no map could show, and whoever took it knew exactly what it meant. As Poirot soon discovers, the direction it marked wasn't north. It was murder. Stay with me till the end. Because the secret behind this compass doesn't just reveal where, it reveals who. So, polish your shoes, straighten your tie, and settle in, because today's mystery is worth every second until the very end. Chapter 1. The inciting incident. Evening had been unusually still. At the luxurious Holbrook estate, nestled in the verdant English countryside, the grand manor, an imposing structure with ivy creeping over its stone facade, had been the scene of high society chatter and soft laughter just hours before. The annual charity ball had come to an end, and the guests were now retiring to their rooms for the night, their faces flushed with wine and dance. But in the shadow of this festivity, something had gone horribly wrong. In the heart of the estate, deep within the drawing room, a commotion echoed through the halls. The polished marble floors reflected the sound of hurried footsteps, and the grand chandelier above seemed to quiver under the weight of a rising tension. In the middle of the room, the celebrated brass compass of Lord Charles Holbrook lay broken on the floor, its intricate needles bent at unnatural angles. Its gleaming face, once an emblem of Holbrook's extensive collection of rare and mysterious artifacts, now lay shattered in a spray of gold shards. But it was not the compass that had caused the alarm. It was the body of Lord Holbrook himself, slumped at the foot of the fireplace, his hand still clutching a torn letter that fluttered uselessly in the night air. The guests who had gathered around him were too stunned to react at first. Then, as the shock of the sight settled in, whispers began to swirl. The brass compass, an object said to have been passed down through generations, had vanished, as had the key to the safe where the family's most prized jewels were kept. The timing of the events suggested more than a coincidence. A crime, it seemed, had been committed in plain sight. But who could have done such a thing in a house full of aristocrats and noble guests? The housekeeper, Miss Wilson, was the first to spot the absence of the compass. Her sharp eyes had always been attuned to the smallest details. Upon discovering that the prized artifact was missing, she immediately went to search the estate, her steps quick and purposeful. However, no trace of the compass could be found. There was no sign of struggle, no obvious motive, just a series of unsettling mysteries waiting to be solved. Word spread quickly, and soon every guest had gathered in the drawing room, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. A large group of dignitaries, wealthy benefactors, and close friends of the Holbrook family stood like statues, frozen in place as they processed the events unfolding before them. The high society atmosphere, once filled with warm laughter and cordial conversation, had descended into an air of paranoia and suspicion. It was at that moment that Captain Hastings, Lord Holbrook's longtime friend and confidant, stepped forward. His features were drawn, his expression one of confusion and concern. He had been in the next room when the cry for help had gone out, but the moment he entered the scene, he could see the quiet terror in the eyes of those around him. Hastings knew that this was no ordinary crime, no simple robbery gone wrong. Lord Holbrook's death had been meticulously planned, executed with a cold precision, and with the disappearance of the brass compass, the mystery only deepened. Something is amiss, Hastings muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the growing murmurs of the guests. At that very moment, a voice that could have silenced 1,000 conversations entered the room. "Wah, mon cher Hastings, what is this I hear of a crime most dreadful?" Hercule Poirot, the legendary detective from Belgium, had arrived. His entrance was as poised as always, his small, sharp figure framed in the doorway. His impeccable suit and carefully groomed mustaches a stark contrast to the chaos around him. Poirot's eyes, always keen and calculating, flickered briefly over the scene before he fixed his gaze on Hastings. Double quotes, "You are here, as always, at the right moment," Poirot said with his usual calm. His voice was soothing, like the soft hum of a violin, yet it carried a weight that demanded attention. "Tell me, Hastings, what is it that has occurred here? A murder, I presume?" Hastings nodded gravely. "Indeed, Poirot, and it is not just the murder of Lord Holbrook that concerns us. The brass compass has disappeared, and with it, all that we thought we knew about the man himself. There are more secrets than we imagined." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "The brass compass, you say? A curious object. But it is not the compass that interests me, it is the reason behind its disappearance. A thief, perhaps, but not an ordinary one. No, Hastings, this is something else. The game, as always, is afoot." With that, Poirot began to survey the room, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He noticed the subtle shifts in posture, the way some guests seemed eager to explain themselves, while others remained unnervingly silent. To Poirot, the clues were already beginning to present themselves, each small quiver, every anxious glance, held meaning. The players in this game had been set in motion, and only Poirot's little gray cells could unravel the tangled web of motives, deceptions, and lies. The stage had been set, the players assembled, and now Poirot would begin his work, to peel back the layers of mystery surrounding the death of Lord Holbrook and the strange disappearance of the brass compass. The evening had only just begun, and Poirot's mind was already working, calculating, deducing. The true game of deception was underway. Chapter 2. The First Clust. Guests had not yet fully recovered from the shock of Lord Holbrook's death. When the estate's constables began their initial investigation, the presence of law enforcement, while necessary, only seemed to amplify the palpable unease that had gripped the manor. Poirot stood near the hearth, his keen eyes scanning the room, his thoughts already whirling as he observed the interplay of gestures and expressions. "I trust you have conducted a preliminary investigation?" Poirot asked, his voice light but carrying the weight of authority. Hastings, standing beside him, nodded. "They've checked the body for any signs of foul play. It's clear enough that Holbrook died from blunt force trauma to the head. The compass was the likely target of the thief." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "A thief, yes, but a very particular one. Who would risk such a thing for an object so easily traceable?" The detective's eyes narrowed, noting the disarray around the room. The desk was cluttered with papers, but they appeared undisturbed. The floor near the fireplace, where the body had been discovered, was oddly pristine, save for the shattered brass pieces. A more careful examination of the area revealed something peculiar. The faint imprint of a boot on the rug, partially obscured by the body's fall. Poirot knelt, his small hands hovering near the mark. "It is subtle, but it tells a story." He muttered to himself, a struggle, or an attempt to move the body. Hastings, standing awkwardly nearby, looked down at the boot print, but saw only a vague impression. "What does that mean, Poirot?" A scuffle. Poirot stood, brushing off his trousers with the same care one might apply to a treasured item. Perhaps it was staged. There's a deliberate positioning to everything here, Hastings. Lord Holbrook's death was not merely a crime of opportunity. This was a message, an orchestrated effort to confuse. But we will uncover the truth, slowly but surely. Poirot's next move was to approach the object of the evening's mystery, the brass compass itself. Its absence had sent ripples through the manor, and its shattered remnants lay like scattered clues, begging to be understood. He bent down, his fingers delicately tracing the shards of metal with the precision of a surgeon. "There's something amiss here," Poirot remarked, his voice low but charged with conviction. "These pieces are too symmetrical. It appears as if they were broken with purpose, not by accident." Hastings, still baffled by Poirot's observations, stood by silently, waiting for the inevitable deductions that would follow. Poirot's gaze moved to the walls, searching for something that might offer an explanation. His eyes finally settled on a pair of portraits, one of Lord Holbrook and another of his late wife, both solemn and distant. There was a story in those eyes, but it was hidden behind layers of history and silence. "Poirot, what do you think the motive was? Why kill him over something like the compass?" Hastings asked, his voice thick with confusion. Poirot smiled softly, his eyes alight with the gleam of discovery. "Ah, Hastings, you are always thinking in terms of what is obvious. The compass is but a symbol. It is the culmination of a deeper plot, one whose threads we have only begun to unravel. The real motive lies beneath the surface." Poirot paused, turning toward the small group of guests who had been gathered in the room earlier. Each of them stood in a tight cluster near the door, their faces drawn and anxious. He took in their postures, their furtive glances, and he could not help but notice the difference in their behavior. Some looked as though they had already formed their own conclusions. Others seemed nervously unaware of what they had walked into. "Let us begin the questioning," Poirot suggested, his voice firm but not unkind. "It is time to observe the reactions of those who may hold secrets." One by one, the guests were invited to share their accounts of the night. Their stories were consistent, almost too consistent. Everyone had been in the ballroom at the time of the murder. There were no disputes over timing, no shocking discrepancies. And yet, Poirot's mind raced, sifting through the layers of these truths to uncover what might be concealed. As the last guest, Miss Agnes Wiltshire, a distant relative of Lord Holbrook, spoke, Poirot observed her closely. She was well-spoken and poised, but her eyes darted nervously when she mentioned her brief conversation with Lord Holbrook earlier in the evening. Something had changed in her tone, something slight yet telling. "Did you speak with Lord Holbrook at length?" Poirot inquired, his tone gentle but probing. Miss Wiltshire's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Oh, just briefly. We had a conversation about the charity event, nothing of importance." Poirot smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Ah, and yet, you mention this conversation as if it were of some significance." I didn't mean it that way, Poirot," she stammered. "It was just a polite exchange, really." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. He could not yet place his finger on it, but he could sense the shifting currents of tension that surrounded Miss Wiltshire. He had seen the telltale signs before anxiety, the subtle change in pitch. She was hiding something. Poirot turned to the others. "There's much to consider, my friends. This is only the beginning. The brass compass will lead us to the truth, but it is the people surrounding it who will reveal the crime's true face." As Poirot surveyed the room, his mind was already piecing together the fragments of information he had gathered. The clues were beginning to connect in his mind, but there was still much to learn. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but they would fall into place, just as they always did. The first steps of the investigation were over. The real work was about to begin, and Poirot, with his unparalleled mastery of human behavior, was ready to unravel the mystery before anyone else had a chance to blink. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. The following morning, the drawing room had been cleared of the disarray, yet the tension that lingered was palpable. Poirot, with his usual precision, had instructed the constables to keep a watchful eye on the guests, but for now, they had been left to their own devices. As the clock struck 10, the guests reluctantly gathered once again, though none had slept soundly. Even the air around them seemed thick with uncertainty, as though something unspoken hung over the entire estate. Poirot, standing at the far end of the room, surveyed the assembly with a calm gaze. Each individual had taken their place according to their own preferences. Some huddled together in nervous whispers, while others tried their best to act unaffected. Though their eyes flickered around the room, alert and searching, the quiet murmur of voices filled the space, but Poirot remained unmoved, as though waiting for something to reveal itself. Hastings stood beside him, observing the guests. They all seemed so polite, but I can tell you, Poirot, there's something beneath the surface. I can feel the tension in the air. Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he watched the suspects interact. Indeed, Hastings, it is a quality one learns to detect after years of observation. It is in the way the hands twitch when a name is mentioned, or the way a look is shared in the corner of the eye. People may think they hide their secrets well, but the body does not lie. As the guests were invited to sit, Poirot took note of their reactions. Miss Wiltshire, still pale from the night before, had taken a seat near the window. Her fingers were nervously fidgeting with the hem of her gloves, but her eyes never strayed far from Poirot. Her anxiety was obvious, yet she masked it with a veneer of composure. By her side sat Lord Holbrook's younger brother, Philip, who had remained eerily quiet. His dark eyes were set in a permanent scowl, though he kept his gaze on the floor rather than on anyone in the room. Philip was a man of few words and even fewer friends. His aloof nature made him seem both distant and suspicious. Across from them sat Catherine Durand, an elegant woman in her late 30s, who had been one of Lord Holbrook's closest confidants. Despite her poised exterior, there was an underlying tension in her posture, as though she was constantly preparing herself for something. Her gaze shifted constantly, as if looking for escape or perhaps a way to misdirect. Poirot's eyes then fell on Dr. Jean-Claude Ekstrom, a physician who had attended to Lord Holbrook on several occasions in the past few months. His cold, analytical demeanor was in stark contrast to the rest of the group. A man of science, Ekstrom had little time for things like superstition or emotion. Yet Poirot knew that behind that controlled mask often lay a mind as complex as any other. "And what of Miss Wilson?" Hastings murmured, nodding toward the housekeeper, who stood near the door with her arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a wary eye. "She's the one who discovered Lord Holbrook's body. Do you think she knows more than she's letting on?" Poirot's gaze flickered briefly to Miss Wilson, whose stoic expression gave little away. She had been working for the Holbrooks for many years, and had always maintained an impeccable reputation. Yet Poirot could sense something hidden in her eyes, a flicker of something too quick to catch. "We shall see, Hastings," Poirot replied quietly. "In time, they will all reveal themselves." The constables had been instructed to maintain a strict watch on all the guests, but for now, Poirot preferred to conduct his investigation through the subtle art of observation. It was a tactic he employed, often waiting for the suspects to speak, to reveal something about themselves or even about others. There was no need for the traditional interrogation just yet. Every small action would speak volumes. Poirot raised his hand, signaling for everyone to be quiet. "It is time for us to begin," he said, his voice measured but firm. "I will ask you all to share what you know, what you saw, and what you might be hiding." The room fell silent. Miss Wiltshire's fingers trembled, but she clenched them into fists, steadying herself. Philip, who had been fidgeting with his cufflinks, now crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze cold. Catherine Durand straightened her back and adjusted her dress, though it was clear that even her poised exterior couldn't hide the unease that ran beneath the surface. Poirot's first question was directed at Miss Wiltshire, who had been the last person to speak with Lord Holbrook before the murder. "Miss Wiltshire," he began, his eyes soft yet piercing, "I understand you and Lord Holbrook had a brief conversation before the tragic event. Can you tell me what it was about?" Miss Wiltshire looked up, her gaze darting briefly to the others in the room before settling on Poirot. Her lips parted slightly, as though she were about to speak, but wasn't entirely sure how. Finally, she managed a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We spoke about the charity event," she replied quietly. He had some concerns about the arrangements. It was nothing of significance. Poirot studied her closely. "Nothing of significance? That is most curious, Miss Wiltshire. And yet, you seem to carry an air of nervousness. Might there have been something more? Something he said that perhaps you would not wish to share?" The room was still. All eyes were on Miss Wiltshire now, but she remained silent, avoiding Poirot's gaze. The silence stretched longer than was comfortable, and Poirot could feel the tension building. It was clear she was hiding something, but Poirot could not yet discern what it was. He turned his attention to Philip Holbrook. "And you, Mr. Holbrook, you were present when the body was discovered. What did you witness?" Philip's face darkened, but his response came quickly. "I saw nothing unusual, Poirot. I came upon the scene after the body had been found. I merely assisted the staff in securing the area." Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes studying the man with meticulous care. A curious reaction. "But perhaps you are simply a man of action, Mr. Holbrook." Poirot shifted his gaze again, taking in each person in the room. The reactions were subtle, but they spoke volumes. The game was underway. Each of these people had something to hide, something they were unwilling to reveal, and it was up to Poirot to untangle their webs of deceit. With each question, he would draw closer to the truth, and every answer, every glance, would bring him one step nearer to unmasking the true culprit. Chapter 4. Poirot Arrivest morning had passed uneventfully, save for the occasional shifting of footfalls outside the drawing room, as the guests returned to their rooms or gathered in quiet corners, no doubt reflecting on the events of the previous night. The tension had not waned, it had only settled into the walls like a pervasive fog, each of the suspects carrying with them the weight of their own suspicions and quiet guilt. But Poirot was not one to allow time to blur the edges of a mystery. No, his mind was already sharp, as it always was when a case began to take root. His mind had wandered through the possibilities, each guest with their own personal history, their hidden motives, their secrets tucked away in the folds of their pasts. All had come together, however unwillingly, in the same place at the same time. But as Poirot always believed, that was no accident. The door to the drawing room creaked open. A hush fell immediately as Poirot stepped into the room, his presence undeniable. His eyes, ever so precise, surveyed the group without a word. His sharp suit, impeccable in every detail, reflected his unspoken elegance. He was not a man of grandiose gestures, nor did he need them. His mind, as always, was his most powerful tool. And it was that mind which had arrived at this moment, ready to untangle the complexities of the crime. Poirot looked around, his gaze landing on each of the guests in turn, before finally settling on Hastings, who stood nearby, awaiting the detective's next move. "Ah, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice as calm and controlled as ever. "I trust the atmosphere in this room has not made you too uneasy?" Hastings, though no stranger to Poirot's ability to command a room, nodded with some reluctance. "It has been unsettling. The tension among them all is palpable, Poirot. What will you do next?" Poirot's lips curled into a subtle smile. "Next, mon ami, we observe, we watch, we listen." Poirot's first act was one of simple observation, though in his mind, it was far from simple. He carefully noted the way the guests stood, how their faces betrayed the anxiety they each tried so hard to hide. He caught every twitch of the hand, every glance between suspects, every quiet clearing of the throat. These small gestures were the first clues to the puzzle that was still taking shape in Poirot's mind. Miss Wiltshire had retaken her place near the window, her posture slightly more rigid than before. Her earlier anxiety seemed to have faded, but there was something else lurking behind her polite smile, something Poirot could not yet pinpoint. She avoided eye contact, though her hands, still trembling, betrayed her calm exterior. Philip Holbrook, on the other hand, was standing off to the side, arms crossed, his eyes narrowed. The scowl on his face had not disappeared, and his stance defensive spoke volumes. Poirot could sense that Philip held some deeper resentment toward the family's estate, something perhaps tied to his brother's wealth and the inheritance he had been denied. Yet his behavior was not so easily categorized. There was something more here, a complexity that Poirot would soon need to untangle. Catherine Durand, seated near the edge of the room, kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her body language one of careful restraint. Her calm facade was almost perfect. Poirot had observed her for only a few moments, but he could already sense that the woman was hiding something, perhaps a past relationship with the deceased, or a hidden motive tied to the estate itself. Dr. Ekstrom, however, stood out like a man out of place. His posture was too stiff, his movements too deliberate. The physician's every word was measured, his answers in the previous questioning succinct, yet lacking any warmth. Poirot had seen many men like Ekstrom before, those who hid their true selves behind a veneer of professional detachment. But it was precisely this detachment that could often hide the deepest of secrets. And then there was Miss Wilson, the housekeeper, who remained standing near the door, her expression as stone-like as it had been the night before. She had already given her account of the events and seemed keen to distance herself from any further involvement. But Poirot knew that the quiet ones often hid the most, whether out of loyalty or fear. It was yet to be determined. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he took in the room. Everything seemed almost too perfect. The guests were too well practiced in their responses, too measured in their answers. Yet, the true nature of the crime was not to be found in their stories. It was in the silences, the discomfort, the small gestures. The truth was hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right person to notice it. "Gentlemen," Poirot said at last, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "And ladies," he added with a glance toward the two women in the room, "it is clear that each of you has been deeply affected by the events of the previous evening. But we must move forward. We must uncover the truth, no matter how difficult it may be." Poirot glanced around at the guests, his gaze lingering just a little longer on each of them. "You may believe that you have concealed the truth, but I assure you I see it all." The guests stiffened, a few of them exchanging fleeting glances. Poirot's words had landed with the weight of certainty. They could not escape him, not while he had his mind set upon them. His next words were simple, yet they carried a finality to them that rang in the silence that followed. "We will begin again," Poirot continued, his voice unshaken. "I will ask each of you to recount, once more, your whereabouts and your actions. This time, you will be careful, for I am watching." As Poirot stood, poised and calm, he could see the subtle shifts in the room, the way each person tightened, preparing themselves for the next round of questioning. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but Poirot remained undeterred. His mind had already begun to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. The game was afoot, and no one, not even the most practiced liar, could escape his scrutiny. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Tension in the drawing room had not dissipated. If anything, it had grown more palpable with Poirot's subtle assertions that he was indeed watching every movement, every twitch of the hand, every tremor of the lip. The guests, already on edge, now found themselves under the scrutinizing gaze of a man who could uncover a lie. With a single glance, they could no longer hide in their own comfortable stories, nor could they deceive themselves into thinking they were free from suspicion. Poirot's first target was Miss Wiltshire. Her earlier nervousness had not escaped him, and her fidgeting, though disguised by her calm demeanor, was the first real clue. Her appearance was immaculate, as befitted a woman of her social standing. But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered around the room, never lingering on any one person for too long. As if afraid of being caught in something she didn't want to acknowledge, "Miss Wiltshire," Poirot began, his voice smooth, but with an underlying sharpness that made the words cut through the room. "You mentioned that you spoke briefly with Lord Holbrook before the tragic event. Tell me, was there anything unusual about that conversation? Did he seem troubled?" The question, simple enough on the surface, sent a ripple through Miss Wiltshire's composure. She had already answered this once, but Poirot knew that the best lies were always repeated in just such a way. The second telling was often where cracks appeared. She took a breath before replying, her voice steady, but Poirot could detect the strain. "Lord Holbrook was always very proper, very reserved. I saw no sign of distress." "If that's what you're asking." Her eyes darted toward the others in the room, and Poirot caught the briefest flicker of discomfort. "No sign of distress, you say?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, I see a certain unease in you, Miss Wiltshire. You claim there was nothing of significance in your conversation, but you also seem anxious. Why is that, I wonder?" She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, she closed it, her eyes fixed on the floor. I suppose it was just a shock. The death of my uncle," Poirot interrupted gently, but with his usual precision. "It is not just a shock, is it? You were hiding something, Miss Wiltshire. Something more than a mere passing exchange." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing more. Poirot gave her a moment, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. It was clear to him that there was more to the story than she was willing to admit, but the timing was not right. For now, he moved on. Poirot turned his attention to Philip Holbrook, who was sitting with his arms crossed, his eyes cold and distant. There was a hardness to him, a reluctance to engage in any sort of emotional display. It was typical of men like him, those who would rather bury their feelings than allow anyone to see their vulnerability. Poirot found it both fascinating and frustrating. "Mr. Holbrook," Poirot began, his voice as smooth as ever. "You are Lord Holbrook's brother, yes? I trust you have known him well. What can you tell me of your relationship? Were there any tensions between you?" Philip's eyes flickered, his jaw tightening slightly. "Tensions?" He seemed almost offended by the suggestion. "We were brothers. We had our disagreements like any family, but there was no bad blood between us." Poirot's eyes never wavered. "No bad blood? That is interesting, Mr. Holbrook, because I observe something in your manner. A slight hesitation when you mention your brother, a certain rigidity in your posture. You seem defensive, as though you are guarding something." Philip's scowl deepened. "I'm not hiding anything, Poirot. This is all some sort of misunderstanding, a tragic accident." Poirot's lips curled slightly, though he remained silent, watching Philip's reaction. The man was clearly lying. Poirot could feel the tension in his words, the way his gaze avoided Poirot's. It was all too obvious, but for now, Poirot let him be. No confession could be pried out of him just yet. Patience was key. The next person Poirot turned to was Catherine Durand, who had been sitting quietly in her chair, her posture rigid and controlled. Her face was a mask of politeness, but Poirot could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her hands rested delicately on her lap. "Mademoiselle Durand," Poirot said, his voice soft but penetrating. "You were one of Lord Holbrook's closest confidants, yes? Tell me, did you have any particular reason for being so near the scene of the crime?" Catherine's eyes met his, but there was no warmth in them. I was in the ballroom when the alarm was raised. I have no idea what happened before that." Her response was quick, rehearsed. Poirot leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Really, no idea at all? It strikes me as curious, mademoiselle, that someone so close to Lord Holbrook would be so uninformed, but then again, I suppose it is only natural for one to avoid discussing matters one does not wish to revisit." Her fingers tightened ever so slightly. And Poirot noticed the slight quiver in her voice as she answered, "I told you, I know nothing." I was shocked. Like everyone else, Poirot remained silent for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. It was a practiced response, one he had heard 100 times before. He didn't believe it, but he needed to gather more information before making his move. Finally, Poirot turned to Dr. Jean-Claude Ekstrom, who had been standing at the edge of the room, his gaze still fixed on the others. Dr. Ekstrom was a man of science, a man who prided himself on logic and reason. Yet Poirot knew that behind that facade of rationality often lay a mind that could be just as easily deceived as anyone else. "Dr. Ekstrom," Poirot said, his voice cool but inquisitive, "you attended to Lord Holbrook in recent months, did you not? Were there any signs of health issues? Any reason he might have been vulnerable?" Dr. Ekstrom's eyes flickered for the briefest moment. Lord Holbrook had some minor ailments, nothing serious. A few bouts of fatigue, but nothing that would cause his death. Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Fatigue, you say? And yet, he seemed to be in excellent health, at least on the surface. A man of his stature, perhaps, would not want to show weakness." Ekstrom's brow furrowed. "I don't see the relevance of this, Poirot. Lord Holbrook was in good condition." Poirot's eyes never left him. "Perhaps, doctor, but you see, I believe there is more beneath the surface. Much more." Chapter 6, First False Lead investigation, had progressed in its usual fashion. Poirot, with his unshakable calm and precision, had interrogated the guests one by one, peeling away at the layers of deception, revealing subtle clues that hinted at hidden motives. But as the day wore on, Poirot could feel that the mystery was deepening, not with new information, but with the growing complexity of the suspects. Each response was more measured, each gesture more deliberate. The walls around the truth were being carefully built, and the deeper he dug, the more impossible it seemed to find a way through them. Poirot sat at a small table by the window, his fingers steepled in thought as he reviewed the facts in his mind. Hastings, who had been standing nearby, quietly observing, approached with an air of nervous anticipation. "Poirot," Hastings began, "what do you make of this? We've spoken to everyone, but I'm no closer to understanding who could have done it. It feels as though the more we ask, the more questions we raise." Poirot looked up, his eyes sharp, yet calm. "Ah, Hastings, that is the art of it, is it not? The mystery grows, but the truth, like any well-honed blade, is sharpest at its point. We must simply allow the clues to align, piece by piece. Yet, you are not convinced by anything we've heard so far?" Hastings asked, unable to mask the doubt in his voice. Poirot paused, his lips curling into a small smile. "Mon ami, I am convinced that someone in this room is guilty, but they are clever. They have woven their story with care, leading us astray with false clues and purposeful misdirection." As Poirot spoke, his eyes flickered over to the group of suspects, who were gathered in the drawing room once more. They appeared to be in quiet conversation, exchanging glances and whispers. For a moment, Poirot's gaze fell upon Philip Holbrook, whose body language had remained stiff and defensive since the very beginning. There was something about the way he held himself, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes never fully meeting anyone else's, that made Poirot wonder if perhaps his earlier suspicions about Philip's motives were correct. Yet, it was not Philip whom Poirot decided to focus on in this next phase. Instead, it was the seemingly calm and collected Dr. Ekstrom. The physician had been an enigma since the beginning. His responses had been measured. His behavior was deliberate. But it was precisely this demeanor that gave Poirot pause. The more he observed Ekstrom, the more he felt something was out of place. Poirot stood, smoothing the front of his suit as he approached the doctor, his footsteps deliberate and slow. The other guests seemed to fall into a hushed silence as Poirot made his way to Ekstrom's side. Dr. Ekstrom, Poirot began, his voice even but carrying a weight of subtle pressure. I must ask you something. It is perhaps a bit unorthodox, but I believe the time has come to explore every possible lead, no matter how small. The doctor turned to face Poirot, his expression neutral, though a slight flicker of unease passed through his eyes. Of course, Poirot. What is it you wish to know? Poirot's eyes locked onto Ekstrom's, his gaze unyielding. Tell me about the missing brass compass, he said, watching for any change in the doctor's demeanor. What can you tell me about its significance? Why, in your professional opinion, would someone go to such lengths to steal it? Ekstrom's gaze shifted momentarily toward the floor, as though searching for the right words. The compass, as you are no doubt aware, is a rare and valuable object, he began, his voice calm but betraying a slight edge of discomfort. It is a collector's item, prized for its historical value, not just its monetary worth. Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the doctor's face. Indeed. But why would someone go to such lengths to steal it, especially when the death of Lord Holbrook was so violent? What purpose does the compass serve in this crime? Ekstrom paused, his lips parting as though to say something, but then closing again, as if he were reconsidering his words. I cannot say. It is difficult to understand why anyone would risk such a thing. The theft of the compass. It seems to be more than just an ordinary crime. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now but no less forceful. You do not find it unusual, Dr. Ekstrom, that you were among the first to see the body? You, who had attended Lord Holbrook's health in recent months. What did you see in him that might have led to his untimely death? Ekstrom's face went momentarily pale. His lips parted, but no words came out. His hands, which had been clasped together before, were now twitching slightly. Poirot, ever so observant, noted these minute changes. Poirot, Dr. Ekstrom said, his voice wavering slightly, I assure you, I did not kill Lord Holbrook. I had no reason to. The man was ill, yes, but there was nothing that would justify murder. No, this is a matter of a thief taking advantage of a tragedy. Poirot studied the doctor for a long moment before he spoke again. It is a curious thing, is it not? The way some people react to a tragedy. They speak of it as if it were nothing more than an accident, a misfortune no more. Yet, for some, tragedy is a tool, something to be manipulated, to be used. The doctor's face was pale, his eyes wide. For a brief second, Poirot saw a flicker of panic pass through him before it was carefully masked. I don't know what you mean, Ekstrom said quickly, his voice rising slightly. I've done nothing wrong, Poirot, nothing. Poirot allowed a small, knowing smile to tug at the corner of his mouth. Of course, Dr. Ekstrom, you have done nothing wrong. But I wonder, perhaps, if you are hiding something that might explain why you know more about this death than you are willing to admit, as the doctor stammered a response. Poirot turned toward the rest of the room. He had his first false lead. This was no ordinary theft. The motive was not clear, but Ekstrom's behavior had raised more questions than answers. The doctor had played a careful hand, but Poirot had already seen the cracks in his facade. Now, Poirot would press on, but the first layer of deception had been peeled back, and somewhere in the tangled web of motives, the truth waited. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut following days at Holbrook Estate brought an increasing sense of impatience, though the outward calm of the manor's residents remained unchanged. Poirot, as always, remained composed, his mind spinning with deductions and possibilities that grew sharper with each conversation, each gesture. The web of deceit surrounding Lord Holbrook's death had deepened, and Poirot knew he was close to finding the thread that would unravel the whole mystery. Poirot's mind, however, was more than just logical calculation. It was also a battlefield where psychological games were fought. He knew that the human mind, when under pressure, would eventually give way. It was simply a matter of time. The guests were beginning to feel the weight of his scrutiny, and the cracks were starting to show. It was time to set the trap. Poirot had been observing the guests more closely. Since his last round of interviews, Catherine Durand, though outwardly calm, had been distracted in recent days, often looking out of the window as though she were waiting for something or someone. Dr. Ekstrom's nervous demeanor, though masked by professionalism, still disturbed him, and Miss Wiltshire, despite her composed exterior, had failed to completely erase the trace of guilt that lingered in her eyes. Poirot knew he had to push them gently, subtly until they broke, until their true feelings surfaced. He had decided to focus on one person in particular for this next phase, Miss Wiltshire. She had been the last person to speak with Lord Holbrook, and her responses had been guarded, almost rehearsed. She had something to hide, and Poirot intended to uncover it. The evening after his conversation with Dr. Ekstrom, Poirot invited Miss Wiltshire to join him in the drawing room. The others were occupied elsewhere, and Poirot found this solitude advantageous. He could now observe her in a less formal setting. When she entered, Poirot stood by the window, his hands behind his back. He did not immediately turn to face her. The silence stretched between them, the tension palpable. He waited, and soon enough, Miss Wiltshire spoke. "Poirot," she began, her voice carefully controlled, "I don't understand why you're so focused on me. I told you everything I know about Lord Holbrook. There's nothing more to add." Poirot turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "Ah, Miss Wiltshire, it is not that I believe you to be hiding something. But you see, I suspect that even if you do not fully understand what it is, you have concealed it." She stiffened at his words, but her expression remained unchanged. Poirot could see the subtle tremble in her hands, though she tried to disguise it by clutching her gloves tightly. "You are a woman of intelligence. I can see that," Poirot continued, stepping closer to her, his voice gentle but insistent. "You know that not every answer we give to a question is truthful. We speak to protect ourselves, to avoid facing something too painful, too uncomfortable. And in your case, Miss Wiltshire, I believe it is exactly that something you wish to avoid." Her eyes flickered, a fleeting moment of vulnerability that Poirot caught immediately. He smiled, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. I don't know what you mean," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not hiding anything. I simply wish for this to be over, for Lord Holbrook's death to be explained." Poirot's gaze never left hers. He was closing in, and he knew it. "But you see, Miss Wiltshire," he said softly, "the truth, as uncomfortable as it may be, will always find a way out, and it has been calling out from you." He paused, letting his words sink in. Miss Wiltshire's posture stiffened, and for a moment, she looked as though she might break down right there. Poirot was careful not to push too hard. It was a delicate dance pressure, but not too much. He was a master of patience. "After all, you've been holding onto something," Poirot continued, his voice soft but laden with meaning. "Something that relates to Lord Holbrook's death. And I believe it has something to do with the conversation you had with him before the tragedy." Her lips parted, but no words came. Poirot pressed on. "There are always tensions beneath the surface, are there not? Relationships that are not what they appear. Secrets that go unspoken until it is too late to hide them. But now, Miss Wiltshire, it is time to speak. What did you and Lord Holbrook discuss that night?" Her gaze darted away from him, and Poirot immediately saw the crack in her composed exterior. He had her. She paused, her breath catching. "I don't want to talk about it." Poirot tilted his head slightly, his expression one of gentle understanding. "I know, Miss Wiltshire, but you must. You see, the truth, as I have said, is always waiting to be revealed, and I will not stop until I find it." Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them quickly, as if embarrassed. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Lord Holbrook, he had discovered something. A secret, something about the family's finances. He wanted me to help him." She broke off, her voice faltering, and for a long moment, the room was still. Poirot did not press her. He allowed her to gather her thoughts, his mind working rapidly, piecing together the new information. "I think he was going to expose something," she continued, her voice cracking. "But I couldn't help him. I couldn't be involved. I didn't know how to stop him, Poirot. I didn't know what to do." Poirot stepped forward, his expression softening. "And so, you stayed silent. But now, Miss Wiltshire, your silence speaks volumes." For a long moment, neither spoke. Poirot let her words hang in the air, letting the weight of the truth settle over her. Miss Wiltshire had given him the first real clue, a secret, a financial scandal, something Lord Holbrook had uncovered, something dangerous. "And now you must share this secret," Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm. Miss Wiltshire nodded, her face pale. "I will, Poirot. I will tell you everything." Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. Following morning, Poirot could feel the temperature of the investigation shift. The guests had become more elusive, and their responses to his questions had become more guarded. Miss Wiltshire's confession about Lord Holbrook's secret was enough to make him more certain that something greater than a simple murder was at play, something intricate, tangled, and possibly far-reaching. But just as Poirot was beginning to piece the puzzle together, an unexpected turn of events sent the case in a new direction. Poirot, Hastings, and the other guests had gathered for breakfast when the news arrived. The housekeeper, Miss Wilson, appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Poirot," she called, her voice trembling. "There's been another incident. A letter. It's gone missing. A very important letter, I believe." Poirot's brow furrowed as he rose to his feet, the warmth of his earlier conversation with Miss Wiltshire dissipating in an instant. "A letter, you say? Where is it?" Miss Wilson shook her head, her hands wringing together nervously. "It was on Lord Holbrook's desk in his study last night. I was cleaning, and when I went back to check this morning, it was gone. I don't know what it means, but it's important. I just feel it." Poirot nodded, his mind already ticking with possibilities. "And did you notice anything else? Anyone who might have had access to Lord Holbrook's study last night?" Miss Wilson paused, then slowly shook her head. "No, only the family. But there's something strange, Monsieur Poirot. The study door was locked when I arrived. It wasn't locked when I left last night, but it was when I returned this morning." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and Hastings, standing nearby, exchanged a concerned glance with the detective. "A locked door, a missing letter. This is becoming more complicated by the moment." Poirot stood silently for a moment, his mind moving through each possibility. The letter, the locked door, the missing compass. There was an undeniable connection, and it was becoming clearer with each passing moment. Poirot had known from the start that the motive was not simply the theft of a rare artifact. No, it was something far deeper. And this letter, whatever it contained, was the key. He turned to Miss Wilson, his voice low but steady. "You are certain, Miss Wilson, that no one else entered the study after you had left?" She nodded, her lips trembling. "Absolutely, Monsieur Poirot. Only the family had access to the study, and I know that they were all accounted for. I don't know what this means." Poirot's mind raced, but he remained composed. "Very well. We will investigate this further, but for now, it is clear that someone is trying to cover something up. A letter hidden away, locked behind a door. This is no ordinary mystery." Poirot turned back to the group, his gaze sweeping over each of them. The pressure of the situation had brought an unmistakable tension to their features. The room, once filled with polite conversation, was now weighed down with the certainty of impending discovery. "Everyone," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the thick atmosphere. "I need your full cooperation. Something is hidden in this house, something important. The letter that has gone missing, the compass that was stolen, and Lord Holbrook's untimely death, they are all connected. And it is my task to uncover the truth." He glanced at Miss Wilson before continuing. "For now, I suggest we move carefully. No one is to leave the estate. This is not the time for flights of fancy or rash actions. You will remain here under my watch until the truth is revealed." The guests exchanged uneasy looks, but none dared to argue. Poirot had made his position clear. He would not rest until every detail was uncovered, every layer peeled back. The room settled into an uneasy silence, each person weighed down by their own suspicions and anxieties. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, stepped beside Poirot, his voice low. "What's your take on this, Poirot?" he asked. "A missing letter, a locked room, and a family full of secrets. This is starting to feel like more than just a murder mystery." Poirot's gaze never wavered from the group, his eyes calculating, his mind already 1,000 steps ahead. "Indeed, Hastings, it is no ordinary mystery. There is something far more sinister at play here. This letter, whatever it may be, is the thread that ties it all together. And whoever is hiding it, they are hiding something far worse than we have yet to understand." Hastings frowned, but before he could respond, Poirot turned on his heel, heading for the study. "We must find the letter, Hastings. Without it, we are left with only half the picture. Come, we will begin there." As Poirot entered the study, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. The room itself seemed to be holding its breath, as if waiting for the truth to be unearthed. The desk where Lord Holbrook had worked, the bookshelves lined with dusty tomes, and the faint scent of tobacco that still lingered in the air, it was all too still, too quiet. Poirot's eyes swept over the room with practiced ease, taking in every detail, every clue that might be hidden in plain sight. The letter, he knew, would not simply be lying around, it would be concealed, carefully hidden, as though it had never been meant to be found. Hastings stood by the door, watching Poirot's every move. "What are we looking for, Poirot? A specific letter?" Poirot's response was a quiet murmur. "Not just any letter, Hastings. The letter that has been hidden, the letter that Lord Holbrook was keeping from someone. It is not a letter of business or correspondence. No, it is a letter that, once read, will tell us who benefits from his death." Poirot turned, his gaze intense, his mind already calculating. "It is time, Hastings. The real game has begun." Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Poirot's investigation into the missing letter had yielded little so far. The study was as immaculate as it had been when the constables first entered. No sign of forced entry, no clues suggesting that someone had rifled through Lord Holbrook's personal effects. It was as if the letter had vanished into thin air. Poirot was well aware that such a disappearance was no accident, and he was growing more convinced that this was the key to unlocking the mystery. "Nothing," Hastings said, his voice filled with frustration. "It's as if the letter was never here at all." Poirot didn't respond immediately. His mind focused on the various connections he had begun to piece together. The subtle clues that he had gathered in the past few days were beginning to form a pattern. Though it remained elusive, he could feel at the strings of the mystery tugging at his thoughts, each thread leading him deeper into a web that had been carefully spun over time. "The letter, Hastings, is important, but it is not the only thing we must consider," Poirot replied at last, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that only he could possess. "What we have here is a case of tangled relationships, hidden connections between the people in this house." Hastings looked perplexed. "You think someone's hiding their connection to the letter? Or is there something more?" Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes still scanning the room. "There is more, Hastings. The letter is merely the final piece in a puzzle that has many parts. There are secrets here, secrets between people who may have known each other for years, but have never revealed the full truth. He turned to face Hastings, his expression sharp. The first step is to consider the relationships between the suspects. There are more than just surface-level connections here. Let us begin by examining them closely. Hastings took a deep breath. All right, Poirot, but where do we start? Poirot's gaze flickered over to the group of suspects, who were gathered in the drawing room once again, as they had been every day since the murder. They were each wrapped in their own personal webs of guilt. But as Poirot looked at them, he saw something more, a deeper connection, something that had yet to be revealed. There, Poirot said, pointing subtly towards Miss Wiltshire and Dr. Ekstrom, who were standing off to the side, speaking in low tones. Miss Wiltshire and Dr. Ekstrom, to people who appear to be worlds apart, yet I suspect they know far more about each other than they are letting on. Hastings raised an eyebrow. What makes you think that? Poirot's eyes never left the two figures in question. It is the way they avoid each other, Hastings. Not simply out of distrust or animosity, but something more. They are hiding something about their past interactions, something that links them. He watched carefully as Miss Wiltshire laughed nervously at something Dr. Ekstrom had said. Though the sound didn't quite reach her eyes, there was no warmth in her laughter, no true amusement. Poirot knew it was a mere mask, something designed to cover an uncomfortable truth. We will speak to them separately, Poirot said. First, let us begin with Dr. Ekstrom. Poirot and Hastings made their way toward Dr. Ekstrom, who immediately stiffened when he saw them approach. The physician's lips tightened, and his eyes flickered briefly toward Miss Wiltshire before he quickly looked away. Dr. Ekstrom, Poirot began, his voice light but probing. We have not yet had the chance to discuss your relationship with Miss Wiltshire. I have noticed that you seem distant, shall we say, when she is near. What is it that lies between you? Ekstrom shifted uncomfortably, his hands folding in front of him. I don't know what you mean, Poirot, he replied, his tone measured but with a slight edge of defensiveness. I've known Miss Wiltshire for years, but there's nothing unusual about our relationship. Poirot studied him carefully, noting the slight twitch of his hand. Nothing unusual. A woman of Miss Wiltshire's position, and yet you show no affection, no familiarity. A little cold, don't you think? Ekstrom's expression hardened, but Poirot saw a flicker of something else beneath the surface fear. Perhaps, or guilt. The doctor had not yet cracked, but Poirot was closing in. Dr. Ekstrom, Poirot continued, I believe you are hiding something. You are not just a simple physician, are you? You know more about Lord Holbrook's affairs than you have let on. And I suspect you were involved with Miss Wiltshire in a way that you have yet to admit. Ekstrom's gaze darted toward Miss Wiltshire again, before he quickly looked back at Poirot, his eyes narrowing. I assure you, Poirot, you are mistaken. I have no involvement in Lord Holbrook's death, nor do I have anything to hide from you. Poirot smiled slightly. We shall see, Dr. Ekstrom, we shall see. Poirot turned to leave, his mind already calculating the next step. The doctor's nervousness had confirmed his suspicions. There was something more between him and Miss Wiltshire, something he wasn't willing to admit. We need to speak with Miss Wiltshire next, Poirot said quietly to Hastings. She knows something important, and it is time she told us. Poirot and Hastings made their way across the room to Miss Wiltshire, who stood by the window, her back stiff and her eyes focused on the garden outside. She didn't turn to acknowledge them as they approached, but Poirot could sense her unease. Miss Wiltshire, Poirot began, his voice soft but carrying an authority that demanded attention. We must speak. There are things left unsaid between us, things that you must reveal. Miss Wiltshire flinched slightly at the sound of Poirot's voice, but she didn't turn around. I have nothing more to say, Poirot, she replied, her tone flat, but with an undercurrent of tension. You have all the information you need. There's nothing more I can tell you." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "That is where you are wrong, Miss Wiltshire. You are holding something back, something that connects you and Dr. Ekstrom to Lord Holbrook's death, and I will find it." Her body stiffened, and for a fleeting moment, Poirot saw the faintest tremor in her hands. She was holding on to something crucial, and it was only a matter of time before she would be forced to reveal it. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue investigation had reached a delicate point. Poirot had continued to methodically peel back the layers of deception, but the true nature of the crime remained elusive. Each suspect held their secrets tightly, offering only carefully crafted answers and carefully measured expressions. Still, Poirot could feel the truth just beneath the surface, like a hidden current waiting to break free. The latest round of interviews had brought some new revelations, but none that had brought him any closer to the heart of the mystery. Dr. Ekstrom, though still maintaining a mask of professionalism, had shown signs of discomfort when questioned. Miss Wiltshire, too, had faltered, though not enough to break her composed exterior. The other guests were similarly uncooperative, each one clinging to their own version of the truth, refusing to reveal the underlying connections that Poirot knew existed. Poirot sat alone in the study once again, his fingers steepled as he pondered the next step. His mind raced through the facts: Lord Holbrook's death, the stolen compass, the missing letter, the tangled relationships among the guests. Every detail was in its place, but one piece still eluded him. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but Poirot had learned long ago that the smallest clues were often the most important. There was a pattern, a subtle connection, that he had missed earlier. Something had been placed in the room, and he had overlooked it until now. Poirot's eyes flickered to the corner of the desk, where a small object sat unnoticed by the others. It was a single piece of paper, barely visible beneath a stack of Lord Holbrook's personal notes. Poirot stood and walked over, carefully lifting the papers to reveal the document beneath. His eyes narrowed as he saw it. A letter, but not just any letter. This was the missing letter, the one that had been taken, the one that everyone had been searching for. But it was not just the contents of the letter that caught Poirot's attention, it was the way it had been hidden. It was as though someone had placed it there deliberately, making sure it would be overlooked by anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Poirot unfolded the letter carefully, his mind already running through the possibilities. The handwriting on the paper was familiar, Lord Holbrook's, and as Poirot read, his mind began to unravel a thread that had been obscured by the chaos of the investigation. The letter contained no grand revelations, no shocking confessions. It was simple, concise, and yet it carried with it an undeniable weight. Lord Holbrook had written to someone outside the household. The letter was dated only a few days before his death, and it spoke of a transaction, a meeting, a promise to be kept. But what caught Poirot's attention was the final line of the letter, written in a hurried scrawl, almost as though Lord Holbrook had written it in haste. "The truth will come out, no matter the cost. I must protect her." Poirot's heart quickened. This was the key. The mention of her, the woman Lord Holbrook had been protecting. Who was she? Why was Holbrook willing to risk everything to protect her? This was the question that had been hanging over the investigation, and now, with this letter, Poirot knew he was getting closer to the heart of the mystery. But there was still more to uncover. The letter was not the end of the puzzle, it was merely a piece of it. And there was something more in the way the letter had been hidden. The careful placement of it beneath the papers. This had not been an accident. Someone had been looking for it. Someone had wanted it to remain out of sight. Poirot turned the letter over in his hands, examining every inch of it. And then, just as his mind was beginning to race with new theories, something else caught his eye. A small smudge on the edge of the paper. Ink, still faintly visible, though smudged by time. Poirot leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. It was a fingerprint. Poirot felt a surge of triumph. This was the clue he had been waiting for. The fingerprint was not one of Lord Holbrook's. It was too small, too delicate. It belonged to someone else, someone who had been in the study recently, someone who had handled the letter without leaving a trace. Poirot's mind raced as he pieced together the significance of this new discovery. Whoever had left the fingerprint had been searching for something, and they had found it. But why had they left the letter behind? What had they been hoping to find? And more importantly, who were they protecting? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside the study. He quickly folded the letter and placed it back on the desk, ensuring that no one would be able to tell it had been disturbed. He turned as the door opened, and Hastings stepped inside, his expression tense. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "there's been another development. We found something, a piece of evidence we missed before. It might be connected to the missing compass." Poirot's eyes widened. "What is it?" Hastings held out a small, delicate object, a ring, intricately designed, with a gemstone that caught the light in a way that seemed almost unnatural. Poirot took it carefully, examining it closely. The ring was beautiful, but its true significance was in the small engraving on the inside, bandana engraving. That Poirot recognized immediately. It was a symbol, an insignia that had once been used by a group of powerful individuals whose names Poirot had come across in his earlier investigations, but whose true motives had remained a mystery until now. The game had changed. The pieces were falling into place. "This ring," Poirot said softly, "belonged to someone who had much to gain from Lord Holbrook's death. And the time has come for us to uncover who that someone is." Poirot stood up, his mind already calculating the next step. The investigation was nearing its climax, and he was determined to see it through to the end. Chapter 11. Tensions. Riseth discovery of the ring had unsettled Poirot, but it also served as a catalyst, an important piece in the puzzle that, he was certain, would soon be solved. The engraved insignia on the ring had set his mind alight with new theories and possibilities, all pointing toward something much larger than a simple murder or theft. Yet, despite the breakthrough, Poirot could not shake the feeling that someone was watching him, someone who knew exactly how close he was to the truth. The atmosphere in the house had become heavier in the days that followed. The guests were growing more nervous, their attempts to remain composed becoming increasingly fragile. Poirot could see the cracks forming beneath their facades, though none of them dared to voice their suspicions openly. Instead, they continued to move around one another like chess pieces, each one trying to outmaneuver the others. As Poirot sat in the drawing room, contemplating the implications of the ring and the hidden letter, Hastings entered, his face flushed with urgency. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "there's something you need to see." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Something new, Hastings? Please do tell." Hastings stepped forward, holding out a piece of paper, carefully unfolded. It was a letter, written in a hurried hand, with no address or salutation. Merely a brief message that seemed to have been scrawled in desperation. "Read it," Hastings urged. "It was found in the study, tucked inside one of the drawers. It's written by Lord Holbrook, but this doesn't match the tone of the other letters. It's different." Poirot took the letter with a steady hand, his eyes scanning the words. The writing was jagged, hurried, as if Lord Holbrook had been under extreme pressure when he had written it. "The time is running out. I cannot hold it off any longer. If anyone finds this, know that I have tried to protect you. But it may already be too late. Do not trust the ones closest to you. The truth will be buried, but not for long. Someone is watching. Be careful." Poirot paused, reading the letter over twice. His pulse quickened, and his eyes darted back to Hastings. "Do you understand what this means?" "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice grave. Lord Holbrook had discovered something monumental. The letter speaks of a threat, of a hidden truth that he feared would be lost forever. Hastings looked perplexed. But who was he trying to protect? This doesn't sound like someone who simply wanted to cover up a theft. There's something much darker behind this, isn't there? Poirot placed the letter down gently on the table, his eyes narrowing. Indeed, Holbrook was not merely trying to protect a family secret or a valuable object. No, this letter speaks of betrayal. It speaks of someone who had been close to him, someone whom he trusted, perhaps the very person who ultimately brought about his death. Poirot stood and walked toward the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens that surrounded the estate. What we are dealing with here, Hastings, is not just a murder. This is a story of manipulation, of hidden motivations, and most importantly, of a carefully orchestrated plan to control the fate of others. Hastings stepped up beside him, looking out at the grounds. But who would want to go to such lengths, Poirot? Why not just take the compass, steal the letter, and be done with it? Why all the secrecy and deception? Poirot turned his gaze back to the room, his eyes fixed on the guests who were gathered in the drawing room once again. They were sitting in uneasy silence, their faces drawn and pale. It was clear that they were all beginning to feel the weight of the investigation pressing down on them. "I have my suspicions," Poirot said slowly, his voice sharp and calculating. "Each of these people, though they try to maintain their composure, has a hidden truth, and someone, perhaps more than one of them, is involved in Lord Holbrook's death. But the question is who?" Hastings frowned, sensing the shift in Poirot's tone. "You think someone in that room is the killer?" Poirot's eyes flickered with determination. "Yes, Hastings, but the time for simple answers is over. The game has grown more complex, and the stakes are higher than any of us realize. Every action, every word spoken, is part of a greater plan, a plan that has been set into motion long before Holbrook's death." Poirot's eyes met Hastings's, his gaze intense. "The relationships between the suspects are not what they seem. They are entangled in ways that none of them understand yet. But I will reveal it. Soon the truth will surface, and when it does, nothing will be the same." As Poirot turned back to the guests, he noticed the subtle tension in the air. There was a new sense of urgency among them, as though they were finally beginning to feel the heat of the investigation. The subtle games they had played before, the half-truths, the strategic silences were no longer enough to protect them. They had become trapped in a web of their own making. Poirot made his way across the room to the group, his expression calm but unreadable. They fell silent as he approached, each of them aware that the detective was about to make his move. The time for subtlety had passed. Poirot was ready to push them, to challenge them, to force them to reveal their true selves. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice steady, "the game has shifted. What was once a matter of a simple theft and murder has now become something far more complicated. There are things hidden in this room, things that you have all tried to keep from me. But I assure you, I will find them." The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from one another. The tension in the room was thick, so thick that Poirot could almost taste it. He knew that they were beginning to crack. It was only a matter of time before the truth came tumbling out. "We will continue our search," Poirot said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "But let me be clear, someone in this house is guilty, and I will uncover who it is, no matter how long it takes." Chapter 12. The confrontation. Tension in the room was suffocating. Poirot stood at the center of it all, his piercing eyes scanning the faces of the guests. The time for subtle observation and calculated questions had passed. Now it was time to confront them, to press them, to force them into revealing the truth that each of them had been so desperately trying to hide. As Poirot stood silently, the guests shuffled uneasily in their seats, their eyes shifting nervously from one person to another. The quiet whispers that had once filled the manor had died down. replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to envelop the entire room. Poirot's gaze settled on Dr. Ekstrom first. The physician had remained outwardly calm throughout the investigation, but Poirot had sensed his unease during their earlier conversations. His stoic demeanor had begun to crack, and Poirot knew that beneath the calm exterior, there was a man on the edge of breaking. The doctor's involvement in the events surrounding Lord Holbrook's death was something Poirot was determined to uncover. "Dr. Ekstrom," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "you have been very careful with your words, haven't you? But I wonder if it is time for the truth to come to light. Tell me, Doctor, how deep does your involvement go?" Ekstrom's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, Poirot saw a flicker of panic in them. The doctor shifted in his chair, his fingers gripping the armrests tightly. "I have told you everything I know, Poirot. I have no more to add." Poirot's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Oh, but that is where you are wrong, Dr. Ekstrom. You have not been entirely forthcoming. You knew more about Lord Holbrook's health than you have admitted. You knew more about his finances, his fears, and his secrets, but you failed to mention one important detail, didn't you?" Ekstrom's jaw tightened, and he turned his gaze away from Poirot. I don't know what you mean," he muttered, his voice wavering. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the doctor's face. "You knew about the missing letter, didn't you, Dr. Ekstrom? You knew that Lord Holbrook was in possession of something dangerous, something that he feared would destroy him, and yet you chose not to tell us. Why?" The room seemed to hold its breath as the tension mounted. Dr. Ekstrom's face grew pale, and he swallowed hard. His lips parted, but no words came out. Poirot continued, his voice soft but insistent. "There was something about that letter, wasn't there? Something that made you nervous, something that made you hesitate. And now I believe it is time for you to admit it." Ekstrom's eyes darted nervously round the room, his breathing becoming more shallow. He was cornered, and he knew it. The weight of Poirot's words was too much to bear. The doctor could no longer deny it. "You don't understand," Ekstrom finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had to protect her. I couldn't let anyone else find out." Poirot's heart raced as he leaned in closer. "Protect her," he repeated, his voice a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Who is this woman, Dr. Ekstrom? And why did you feel the need to protect her? What did she have to do with Lord Holbrook's death?" Ekstrom's shoulders slumped as if the weight of the confession was too much for him to bear. She was in danger. Lord Holbrook discovered something about her past. He was going to expose it, but I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let him ruin her life. Poirot's mind spun as he tried to make sense of this new revelation. The missing letter, the secret, the woman. There was a connection here, one that he had yet to fully grasp. But it was clear now that Ekstrom had been playing a dangerous game, one that involved far more than just protecting Lord Holbrook's legacy. Hastings, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "But why would Lord Holbrook be willing to die for her secret?" he asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "Surely there's more to it than just a woman's reputation." Poirot turned his attention back to the group. "Indeed, Hastings, this is not just about reputation. This is about something far deeper, something that could destroy not only the woman in question, but also the people around her. It is clear that the stakes were high, and that Lord Holbrook's death was not a random act. No, it was a calculated move to keep something hidden." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "And now we must discover who else was involved. Who else knew about this woman? Who else had something to gain from Lord Holbrook's death?" There was a long silence as Poirot's gaze shifted from one guest to the next. The room was thick with tension, and the guests were growing increasingly uneasy. They knew that Poirot was on the verge of uncovering something monumental, something that would change everything. Finally, Poirot turned back to Ekstrom. You have told me part of the story, Dr. Ekstrom, but there is still much that you are not saying. Who is this woman? What was Lord Holbrook trying to protect her from? Ekstrom swallowed hard, his eyes filled with fear. Her name is Clarice. She is the daughter of someone powerful, someone who would do anything to keep her hidden. Lord Holbrook was going to expose the truth, but I couldn't let that happen. I had to stop him. Poirot's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. Clarice, the woman, the secret, the connection to Lord Holbrook's death. It was all becoming clear, but the final piece still eluded him. You say you couldn't let it happen. Dr. Ekstrom, Poirot said softly. But now, I ask you this, who else helped you? Who else was involved in this cover-up? Ekstrom's eyes widened, his breath coming faster. I can't say, he muttered. You don't understand. She's in danger. If anyone finds out, it will be too late. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the doctor. I understand, Dr. Ekstrom, but now you must trust me. You have to tell me everything, for her sake and for your own. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The weight of Dr. Ekstrom's confession hung heavily in the room, though it barely scratched the surface of the truth. Clarice, the woman whom the doctor had been so desperate to protect, remained an enigma hidden in the shadows of Lord Holbrook's secrets. Yet Poirot could sense that the revelation was only the beginning of a much darker story. The guests were clearly unsettled, their faces drawn tight with nervous anticipation. The dynamics of the investigation had shifted once again. No longer was the murder simply about a stolen artifact. Now it seemed to involve a hidden family legacy, buried secrets, and a woman whose identity had the power to unravel everything. Poirot, ever so calm, studied the guests with careful deliberation. As much as they tried to maintain their composure, their unease was becoming increasingly palpable. Their attempts at hiding their guilt were growing more transparent, and Poirot knew it was only a matter of time before someone would make a move. His attention turned back to the doctor, who had been standing at the edge of the room, eyes wide and chest rising and falling with nervous breath. Dr. Ekstrom's fingers trembled slightly as he clasped his hands together, as though trying to contain the storm within him. Poirot's eyes narrowed, watching the doctor closely. You are afraid, Dr. Ekstrom, he said quietly, but with the unmistakable authority that only he could command. Afraid of what might happen if the truth comes to light. But know this, the truth always has a way of escaping, even when you think you have control over it. Hastings, standing to Poirot's left, could feel the palpable tension in the room. He had seen Poirot work his magic before, but never like this. There was a sense of urgency in the air, a realization that time was running out for everyone involved. Suddenly, the sharp sound of a door opening broke the silence. Poirot's head snapped toward the source of the noise. It was Miss Wiltshire, her face pale and drawn. She stood in the doorway, her posture rigid, her eyes wide with fear. I need to speak with you, Poirot, she said, her voice trembling. Poirot did not move immediately, but he caught the anxious flicker in her eyes, the same uncertainty that had marked her behavior since the beginning of the investigation. He nodded, signaling for her to come closer. Hastings remained silent, watching the exchange unfold with quiet curiosity. I don't know what to do, Miss Wiltshire continued, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to get involved in something like this. Poirot raised a hand, cutting her off gently. You are involved now, Miss Wiltshire. And so, it is time for you to tell the whole truth. No more half answers. No more evasions. We are all part of this, whether we wish to be or not. Miss Wiltshire nodded, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with her gloves. I never wanted Lord Holbrook to find out. I thought it would destroy everything. But he knew. He knew about her. Poirot's eyes gleamed with an almost imperceptible shift of recognition. She, he repeated. Who is she, Miss Wiltshire? Who is the woman that your uncle Lord Holbrook was trying to protect?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Clarice. She's my sister. My half-sister." Poirot stood still for a moment, processing this revelation. A half-sister? The connections were beginning to form, but the puzzle was still incomplete. Miss Wiltshire had hidden the truth about her sister, and now Lord Holbrook's discovery of this hidden family connection had become a central piece of the mystery. But the significance of Clarice's identity, why she was being protected so fiercely, remained unclear. "You said Lord Holbrook was trying to protect her," Poirot pressed. "Why? What was it that made him want to keep her secret?" Miss Wiltshire's face darkened as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clarice isn't like us. She wasn't raised in the same circles. She's not the daughter of my father, she's the daughter of my mother's former lover. She's been kept away from the family for years, hidden from public view. But now I fear that Holbrook was going to expose everything, our mother's scandal, Clarice's true parentage. It would ruin everything." Poirot absorbed her words, piecing together the fragments of the story that had been buried for so long. Lord Holbrook had uncovered the truth about Clarice, and that discovery had set off a chain of events that had led to his death. But what role did the others play in this? And why was someone so desperate to keep Clarice hidden from the world? "I see," Poirot said softly, his voice thoughtful. "But there is still more to this, Miss Wiltshire. Why did Holbrook need to keep this secret? What did he fear?" "I don't know," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "But now it's too late. The letter, the compass, the secrets, they've all been revealed. And someone's trying to stop us from exposing the truth." Poirot took a deep breath, his mind working through the possibilities. Someone was trying to silence them all, to prevent Clarice's identity from coming to light. But who and why go to such extreme lengths to hide the truth? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the manor, followed by hurried footsteps in the hallway. Poirot's head snapped toward the door, his instincts immediately on high alert. "What is that?" Hastings asked, his voice sharp with concern. Poirot didn't answer immediately. His thoughts were racing. Someone had just made a move, someone was trying to escape. The door to the study flew open with a force that rattled the frame. Standing in the doorway was Philip Holbrook, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. "Poirot," Philip gasped, his voice hoarse. "They're going to destroy everything. They're coming for her." Without another word, Philip bolted for the door. But before he could take another step, Poirot was already moving, blocking his path with the calm certainty of someone who had already anticipated this move. "Where do you think you are going, Mr. Holbrook?" Poirot asked, his voice steady and unyielding. Philip froze, his eyes widening. "I can't let them get to her. She has to be protected." Poirot's gaze narrowed, his voice firm. "You've already made a grave mistake, Mr. Holbrook. You cannot run from this any longer. It is time for the truth to come out." Chapter 14. The final piece falls into Plesseith Manor had gone silent once again. The commotion in the hallway had died down, and the guests had been ushered back into the drawing room, their faces pale with fear and confusion. The urgency in Philip Holbrook's voice had been unmistakable. Someone was moving to stop them from uncovering the truth, and whoever it was had made their move. But what exactly had been set in motion? Who was trying to silence them, and why? Poirot's mind was already working through the possibilities, each thread of the mystery winding tighter in his thoughts. He had reached a critical point. The missing letter, the stolen compass, the secret family connection, it was all part of a larger story, one that was slowly revealing itself to him in fragments. But now, it seemed that someone was prepared to do anything to keep those fragments from falling into place. Poirot turned to Philip Holbrook, who stood in the doorway, his face still drawn with panic. His earlier attempt to flee had failed, but there was something more pressing now. The truth was on the verge of being revealed, and he could sense the urgency in the man before him. "You were about to leave," Poirot said, his voice calm yet firm. "You must stay here, Mr. Holbrook. There's no escaping this. We are all part of this puzzle now, whether we wish to be or not." Philip took a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging in defeat. He nodded, though his expression remained strained. "I don't know what else to do," he muttered. "Everything is falling apart. I've tried to protect her, to keep the family safe, but I've only made things worse." Poirot stepped closer, his sharp eyes never leaving Philip's face. "Protect her? Who, Mr. Holbrook? Who are you trying to protect, and why?" Philip hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the other guests in the room. They had all been listening, their eyes wide, their breaths held. The weight of the moment was not lost on anyone. Poirot's scrutiny had driven them all to the edge of their seats, waiting for the truth to finally emerge. "It's Clarice," Philip said quietly, his voice breaking. "She's the one I've been protecting. But it's not just about her anymore. It's about everything about what she represents, about the family's legacy, and about Lord Holbrook's discovery. I never thought it would come to this. I never thought she would be the one to bring all of this down." Poirot's eyes flashed with understanding. "Clarice is not just a woman you are protecting, Mr. Holbrook. She is the key to all of this. Lord Holbrook knew something about her, something that, if exposed, could destroy the family." Philip nodded slowly, his hands trembling. "Yes, he discovered her true parentage, about who her real father is. I don't know how he found out, but when he did, he was going to expose everything. He couldn't live with the shame, and he didn't want the rest of the family to suffer because of it." Poirot's mind raced, connecting the dots in a way that made the entire situation clear, yet deeply unsettling. Lord Holbrook's death, the hidden letter, the stolen compass, all of it had been part of a larger plan. Holbrook had stumbled upon a truth so devastating, so dangerous, that it had threatened to tear the family apart, and now someone was willing to kill to keep that truth hidden. "Who is her father, Mr. Holbrook?" Poirot asked, his voice cutting through the air with quiet urgency. Philip hesitated, his eyes flickering to the others in the room before he finally spoke. "It's my father. He's Clarice's father. Lord Holbrook was her half-brother. My father had an affair with my mother, and when my mother found out she was pregnant, she kept Clarice hidden from the rest of the family. She never told anyone who the father really was." Poirot's eyes widened slightly, though his expression remained composed. This revelation changed everything. The family secrets, the lies that had been buried for so long, everything was now in plain view. "So, your father, the true father of Clarice, was trying to protect her from Lord Holbrook's discovery," Poirot said, piecing the story together. "But why would he kill Holbrook to keep the secret? What was Holbrook planning to do with the information?" Philip's face darkened. "He was going to expose everything, Clarice's parentage, the affair between my father and my mother. He was going to ruin the family's reputation, destroy everything we had. My father couldn't let that happen. He would do anything to keep Clarice safe, to keep her hidden." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And that is why your father took matters into his own hands. He killed Lord Holbrook to protect Clarice, to prevent the truth from coming out." Philip's face was pale with guilt and fear. "Yes, I tried to stop him, but I was too late. I thought I could keep it all under control, but the more I tried to protect Clarice, the worse it became. I couldn't let anyone know. But now, with Lord Holbrook dead, I don't know what to do." Poirot turned toward the others in the room, his eyes scanning each face with calm precision. They were all connected by the secrets of the past, and they had all played a part in this tragic web of lies and deception. "The truth is now out. Mr. Holbrook," Poirot said softly, "it is time for you to stop hiding. It is time for all of you to face the consequences of what has been done." He turned back to Philip, his voice steady. "And as for you, Mr. Holbrook, your part in this story is not over. You have kept your sister's secret, but now you must decide what to do with it. The game is finished, and you must face the truth." Philip lowered his head, his shoulders sagging with the weight of his confession. Poirot could see the guilt and the fear that had haunted him for so long. But now, with the truth finally laid bare, it was time for justice to take its course. Poirot turned back to the group, his gaze firm. The final piece has fallen into place. Now, we must deal with the consequences. Chapter 15. The final gathering had come. The weight of the investigation pressed upon Poirot's shoulders like a heavy cloak. But it was a weight he welcomed. The truth was within reach, and the time for subtlety had passed. Every guest, every suspect, every piece of the puzzle had been carefully examined, and now Poirot was ready to reveal the intricacies of the plot that had unfolded in Holbrook Estate. Poirot stood in front of the grand fireplace, his hands folded behind his back as the last of the evening's shadows stretched across the room. The flickering firelight cast an eerie glow over the faces of those gathered before him. Each one of them had played their part, consciously or not, in the tale of Lord Holbrook's death. And now, Poirot would bring the story to its inevitable conclusion. Hastings stood to one side, his brow furrowed, his eyes darting from one person to another. His loyalty to Poirot was unwavering, but even he could feel the tension in the room, thick and palpable. The suspects had been gathered in the drawing room, where the quiet murmur of their voices had died down into silence the moment Poirot entered. Their faces, once composed, now reflected anxiety and apprehension. Poirot's gaze swept over the guests, each of them nervous, though none would admit it openly. There was Dr. Ekstrom, pale and silent, Miss Wiltshire, her hands trembling in her lap, and Philip Holbrook, who had barely spoken since his revelation about his family's dark secret. Then there was Catherine Durand, who had maintained her poised demeanor throughout the investigation, but now seemed to be harboring a quiet uncertainty beneath her calm fade. And lastly, Miss Wilson, the housekeeper, whose stoic expression betrayed none of the emotions she had experienced in the aftermath of Lord Holbrook's death. Poirot cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "My friends," he began, his voice firm, "the time has come to uncover the truth. What has been hidden in the shadows, what has been carefully concealed by lies and half-truths, will no longer remain veiled." He paused, his eyes sweeping over each of them once again. "You all have your secrets, your motives, but I assure you, it is not the secrets that are most dangerous. It is the lies we tell ourselves, the stories we create to shield ourselves from the truth." Poirot turned slightly, his gaze landing on Philip Holbrook. "Mr. Holbrook, you have told us much about your family, about Clarice, about your father's involvement in Lord Holbrook's death. But what you have failed to mention is the most important part of the story. You see, while you were trying to protect your sister, you forgot one crucial thing. You were protecting the very man who killed Lord Holbrook." Philip's face drained of color, and he stood up suddenly, his hands clenched at his sides. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his voice rising in a mix of fear and frustration. Poirot's gaze remained steady, unfazed by Philip's outburst. "The truth, Mr. Holbrook, is that your father was not the only one with a motive. You'd had a reason to silence Lord Holbrook. You knew about your sister's true parentage, and you knew, as well, that your father would go to any lengths to keep that secret hidden. But you also knew that Lord Holbrook's discovery threatened more than just your family's reputation. It threatened your inheritance." A gasp echoed from the group, and Philip's face twisted with rage. "You're wrong," he spat, his voice cracking. "I would never kill my own brother, no matter what. You have no right to accuse me." Poirot's expression softened, though his eyes remained intense. "I do not accuse you lightly, Mr. Holbrook, but I do accuse you of something else, the crime of omission." The crime of standing by while your father murdered your brother. You were complicit, whether you wish to admit it or not. Hastings, who had been standing silently by Poirot's side, stepped forward. But Poirot, if Philip Holbrook didn't kill Lord Holbrook, then who did? Are you suggesting that it was the father who actually did it? Poirot held up a hand to stop him. Hastings, you are too quick to jump to conclusions. The father may have had a hand in keeping Clarice's secret, but the one who dealt the final blow was someone closer than you realize. Poirot turned back to the guests, his eyes scanning the room with methodical precision. "It was you, Miss Wiltshire," he said quietly, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "You, who had the most to gain from your brother's death. The inheritance, the family's wealth, that all fell to you once Lord Holbrook was out of the picture." Miss Wiltshire froze, her face paling as she locked eyes with Poirot. "No," she whispered, almost too softly for anyone to hear. "That's not true." Poirot nodded slowly, acknowledging the subtle shift in her demeanor. "It is true, Miss Wiltshire. You knew that your brother was about to reveal the truth about Clarice. You knew that if Lord Holbrook succeeded in exposing your sister's parentage, it would destroy everything you had worked to protect. So, you took matters into your own hands." Miss Wiltshire's lips trembled as she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Poirot took a step closer, his voice now barely above a whisper. "You killed Lord Holbrook to protect your own future, Miss Wiltshire. You feared that his revelation would cost you everything." For a moment, the room was still. Poirot's gaze did not waver from Miss Wiltshire's face as he watched her break down in front of him. Her defenses shattered, and the truth finally emerged. "I didn't want to," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "But I had no choice. I couldn't let him ruin everything. I couldn't let him destroy Clarice. And in the end, I thought I was doing the right thing. But I was wrong." Poirot's expression softened, though his gaze remained focused. "You were wrong, yes. But now, the truth is here. The game is over, Miss Wiltshire." As the truth of the murder came to light, the other guests in the room stood frozen, their faces reflecting shock, disbelief, and guilt. The intricate web of lies had finally been unraveled. Poirot had done what he did best. He had revealed the truth, layer by layer, until nothing remained hidden. But even as Miss Wiltshire broke down, Poirot knew that the end of the case was not the end of the consequences. In a world of secrets and lies, the truth had its price. Chapter 16. The reveal. Room was thick with silence. Every pair of eyes locked on Miss Wiltshire as she trembled beneath the weight of Poirot's gaze. She had admitted her involvement in the murder of her brother, Lord Holbrook, but something still lingered in the air. A question unasked, a truth still waiting to be fully exposed. Even as she collapsed into herself, her sobs echoing in the quiet room, Poirot knew there was more to unravel. Miss Wiltshire's hands trembled as she wiped at her eyes, still trying to steady her breath. Poirot remained calm, his voice gentle yet unyielding. "You have confessed to killing Lord Holbrook, but there is one thing still left to answer. The question of why you chose to take such drastic measures. Why kill your brother to protect Clarice? Why not simply keep the secret?" Hastings stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Poirot, she's already admitted her guilt. What more do we need to know?" Poirot's eyes met Hastings's, his expression resolute. "There's always more, Hastings. There's always a deeper layer of the truth, waiting to be uncovered." Poirot turned back to Miss Wiltshire, his gaze fixed on her. "You killed Lord Holbrook because you were desperate to protect your sister, yes. But it was not just her reputation you sought to protect. It was your own future. You feared the exposure of Clarice's parentage would destroy everything you had worked for." Miss Wiltshire nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't let him destroy everything. I couldn't let him expose the truth. If he had, we would have lost everything, my family, our name, everything. Poirot took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You would rather live with guilt than face the consequences of your actions. But now, Miss Wiltshire, the truth is out. There's no escaping it. As the tension hung in the room, Poirot's thoughts began to shift. He had uncovered the motive, the confession. Yet something nagged at him, an undercurrent of doubt that refused to be dismissed. He had been too quick to assume that Miss Wiltshire was the only one involved in the murder. The truth, he realized, was more complex than he had first believed. He turned to the group, his eyes scanning each face in turn. It is not enough to understand the motive. We must understand the context, the relationships between all of you. Lord Holbrook's death was not simply the result of one person's actions. There were others who played a role in this tragic event. It is time for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Hastings, sensing the change in Poirot's demeanor, spoke up. "Poirot, what are you saying? You don't believe Miss Wiltshire acted alone?" Poirot's eyes flickered with a knowing glint. "No, Hastings. Miss Wiltshire was a part of the plan, but she was not the sole architect. Someone else was involved. Someone who was just as invested in keeping the truth hidden." The room held its breath as Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Ekstrom, who had been silent throughout the exchange. The physician's hands, previously resting calmly at his sides, were now tightly clenched. His face, once composed, had grown pale, his lips tight with nervous anticipation. Poirot stepped toward Dr. Ekstrom, his voice calm yet firm. "Dr. Ekstrom, you have been remarkably quiet. I believe it is time for you to speak. You knew more than you let on about Lord Holbrook's investigation into Clarice's parentage. You knew about the threat he posed to your own interests, and you took steps to ensure that it would be stopped." Ekstrom's eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing his face. He looked around at the other guests, his breath quickening. I didn't kill Holbrook," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I was only trying to protect her from the truth. I never meant for any of this to happen." Poirot's gaze softened, though the intensity remained in his eyes. "You didn't kill Holbrook, no, but you played a key role in ensuring that Miss Wiltshire would have the opportunity to act. You were the one who first discovered Lord Holbrook's suspicions about Clarice's parentage, weren't you?" Dr. Ekstrom swallowed hard, his face flushing with guilt. "Yes, I knew that Lord Holbrook was planning to expose everything, and I couldn't let that happen. I thought that if I could stop him, if I could make him see reason, then maybe we could keep this secret buried." Poirot's voice grew colder, his words sharper. "And you believed that Miss Wiltshire would be the one to do it. You manipulated her, fed her fears, made her believe that killing Lord Holbrook was the only way to protect her family. You knew she would act, and you used her to do your bidding." Ekstrom's shoulders slumped, and he looked down at his hands. "I never intended for it to go this far. But when Miss Wiltshire came to me, when she said that she would do anything to protect Clarice, I encouraged her. I told her that there was no other way. I thought I was helping her." Poirot's expression softened slightly, though his gaze remained unwavering. "You helped her, yes, but in doing so, you condemned her. You allowed her to believe that murder was the only option." The room was silent once again, the weight of Poirot's words hanging heavily in the air. Miss Wiltshire's face had drained of color, her eyes wide with disbelief as she took in the full extent of the doctor's involvement. She looked at him, her expression one of hurt and betrayal. You knew," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You knew, and you didn't stop me." Dr. Ekstrom nodded slowly, his face contorted with regret. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I should have stopped you, Miss Wiltshire. I should have told you to walk away." Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving the two of them. "And now we are left to face the consequences. The truth is out, and it is time for all of you to face what has been done." He turned to the rest of the group, his voice firm. Lord Holbrook's death was not just a crime of passion. It was a crime of desperation, of fear, and of lies. But now the truth has been revealed, and it is time for justice to be served. Chapter 17. Outcome and justice. The room fell into a profound silence. Poirot's voice still echoed in the air, the truth of the events laid bare. The tension that had once been so thick now felt like an oppressive weight. Stifling every breath, Dr. Ekstrom stood with his head lowered, his guilt etched deeply across his face, while Miss Wiltshire's pale expression spoke of a confusion and sorrow that had never truly left her. The others in the room had grown unnervingly quiet, unsure of how to respond. Caught in the web of their own entanglements, Poirot, having revealed the most crucial details, took a measured step forward. His calmness contrasted with the chaos that had been unleashed. But it was clear that the storm had passed. The time for confession had come. Now it was time for consequences. Miss Wiltshire, Poirot began, his voice unwavering. You sought to protect your family, but in doing so, you destroyed it. The path you chose, while motivated by love for your sister, was one of darkness and lies. But your actions were not without aid. He turned to Dr. Ekstrom, his gaze sharp. And you, Doctor, you believed you were saving a family from ruin, but instead, you condemned Miss Wiltshire and yourself. You manipulated her fears, and in doing so, allowed her to believe that murder was her only option. You let her fall into the trap. The doctor's face twisted with remorse, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he whispered hoarsely. I thought I was protecting her. I was wrong. Poirot nodded, his expression softening slightly. We all think we act out of love, but sometimes the very thing we try to protect is what we end up destroying. For a moment, the room held a heavy silence as the weight of Poirot's words sank in. Miss Wiltshire looked from Poirot to Dr. Ekstrom, a tear slipping down her cheek. What have I done? She murmured, her voice thick with grief. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted to protect her. Poirot approached her slowly, his presence commanding yet understanding. You did what you thought was right, Miss Wiltshire. But in the end, your actions, however well-intentioned, only caused harm. But now you must face what has been done, and justice, as always, must prevail. Hastings, who had stood by quietly, observing the final moments unfold, stepped forward. So what happens now, Poirot? The truth is out. What will become of them? Poirot turned, his gaze soft but resolute. What happens next, Hastings, is for the authorities to decide. Justice will take its course, and the law will weigh the consequences of Miss Wiltshire's actions and Dr. Ekstrom's involvement. But there is one thing I can say with certainty. Hastings tilted his head, intrigued. What is that? Poirot's eyes glinted with a quiet determination. The truth, Hastings, always comes to light. No matter how deeply it is buried, no matter how many lies we weave, the truth will eventually reveal itself. The tension in the room seemed to dissipate, replaced by a palpable sense of finality. Miss Wiltshire and Dr. Ekstrom remained silent, both lost in their own reflections. But they understood that their fate had been sealed. The web they had spun was unraveled, and there would be no escaping the consequences of their actions. Poirot stepped back, his posture straightening as he addressed the group. This case, as tragic as it is, serves as a reminder to us all. Secrets, no matter how well kept, always find a way to escape. And when they do, they bring with them the unraveling of all that has been built upon them. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The game is over. The truth has been revealed. Now it is time for justice to do its work. As Poirot turned to leave, Hastings followed him quietly to the door. Poirot, Hastings said softly, you did it again. You brought the truth to light, just as you always do. Poirot smiled, a small but satisfied smile, and turned to face his companion. Ah, Hastings, it is not just about finding the truth. It is about understanding why we keep it hidden in the first place. With that, the two of them left the room, leaving behind the guests who would now face the consequences of their actions. Poirot's work was done. The case of Lord Holbrook's death had come to a close, but the ripples of its truth would echo for some time to come. Chapter 18. The closing remarked rain had begun to fall, softly tapping against the windows of the Holbrook estate as Poirot stood by the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. The guests had departed hours ago, their fates now in the hands of the law. The tragedy of Lord Holbrook's death, the twisted web of secrets and betrayal, had been laid bare, and justice, as Poirot had predicted, would soon take its course. Hastings, standing nearby, observed Poirot's quiet contemplation. Another case solved, Poirot. Another mystery unraveled. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind still running over the details, though his expression remained composed. Yes, Hastings, another case, but not without its lessons. People hide their truths, not because they wish to protect others, but because they fear the consequences of what happens when they are exposed. In the end, it is not the lies that bind us, but the truths we dare not confront. Hastings watched him thoughtfully. And what of Miss Wiltshire and Dr. Ekstrom? They will face their consequences, Poirot replied softly, his eyes distant as he gazed into the flickering flames. But they were not the only ones responsible. Everyone in that room played a part, whether in action or in silence. Sometimes we all allow ourselves to be complicit, even when we think we are not. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression softening slightly. We believe often that we are separate from the chaos around us, but we are all connected, Hastings. Every decision we make has ripples, and those ripples always reach the shore. Hastings was silent for a moment, contemplating Poirot's words. Then he sighed, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. And you, Poirot, always find a way to make sense of it all. Poirot's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. It is not about making sense, my friend. It is about understanding. The truth, in all its complexity, is a puzzle. And puzzles, you see, are simply things waiting to be solved. The room fell silent again. The only sound was the quiet rhythm of the rain outside. Poirot stood still for a moment longer, then turned, his posture as straight and assured as ever. "Come, Hastings," he said, his voice soft but firm. "There is nothing more to be done here. We must move on, as we always do. The world is full of mysteries, and while some are solved, many remain unsolved. But that is the nature of life." Hastings followed him toward the door, the weight of Poirot's words lingering in the air. As the two of them stepped out into the night, the mysteries of the world felt somehow less daunting. Poirot had shown him, once again, that the truth, however hidden, would always find its way to the surface, and that, in the end, was enough.